Hi, everyone. This is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. Be sure to check out our blog and our newsletter and our Facebook page. And please subscribe to the channel and check out our great sponsors, Italy Rooting, Phil Italy, and Abitativa Casa. And today I have a great guest, Francesca La Torre, and she is from California. So thanks for being here, Francesca, and getting up early.
Thank you. No problem whatsoever.
Uh, so, I usually start off with the same question. Why and when did you start, checking into the family and researching them?
Well, my situation's a little bit different because I'm actually first generation American. So it was my father that came from Sicily as an adult in about 1969. So it's recent. And with it being recent, he was actually the only one of his family of six siblings who left the town that we're from, which is Gela in Sicily, which is a lot of people don't know about Gela, but it does have a lot of ancient Greek artifacts there, but it's not really a tourist town. It's close, it's actually halfway in between, I would say, Catania and Agrigento, which is more well known. So my father came in 1969, so I didn't have to research. Well, let me just say, I thought I did not have to research anything. So my grandmother and all of my aunts and uncles and cousins remained in Gela. So I spent my entire life pretty much going back and forth to visit, starting at the age of 6, when I went with my father, just him and I, because my grandmother fell down the stairs, broke both her arms, and needed assistance. So we went, that was my first experience. And coming from California and growing up in Oakland, California, which does not, Oakland back in the 1900s, the early 1900s, did have a larger Italian community that had immigrated there. But when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, we did not live in an Italian area. So we were the only ones of Italian descent. And so it was a very different experience my first time going to Sicily in 1977. I think I was 6 years old. So 1977. So much so that I woke up to the goats coming down the street. You would hear the bell every morning about 5 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, and the goat herder is herding his goats down all the streets selling milk, goat's milk, door to door. You have your own glass bottle. He milks them right there in front of the door. And that was my experience at 6 years old, coming from an urban area in California to, this culture shock of Sicily in the mid 70s, which was very old fashioned compared to what it is today. It's a lot more modern today, but you will still see goat herders today if you're in the country. So big culture shock for me. Let me talk a little bit about my father coming in 1969. He was a merchant marine for Italy and had traveled all over the world. He felt when he was a teenager that he really wanted to explore the world. He wanted to see what the rest of the world was like. And so he became a merchant marine. And after, I think, 6 years or 7 years of traveling around the world, when his boat landed in San Francisco, or his ship, he decided he loved it. There was a large, and there is still a large Italian community in San Francisco. You can still hear today Italian being spoken. There's a very large Italian American club called the San Francisco Italian Athletic Association, which it does have a little gym, but it's mostly a social club. And they have over 1,000 members. And my brother is actually the president of the organization today. So when my father came to San Francisco and found all of these Italians, he decided he wanted to stay. So basically, he needed to find a wife. So he was introduced, he made friends in the Italian community. And just by coincidence, my mother worked for an Italian immigrant at they called them beauty parlors back then, which now, they're salons. So she worked in a beauty parlor, and the owner of the salon or the beauty parlor was, she became very good friends with, and she worked for her for many years. And she was from northern Italy. I believe it's called Celle Ligure, which is a small town in northern Italy on the Italian Riviera. So she came to America, became a businesswoman, and employed my mother for many years. And she had many friends in San Francisco. And one of those friends happened to walk into the beauty parlor one day and talk to her to see, did she know anyone who would be interested in marrying his friend who was new to America. And after he left, my mom tells me now that, this Italian gentleman came in speaking to her in only Italian, and she couldn't understand Italian because my mom is actually Portuguese from the Azore Islands. But her family came in the early 1900s, so they were in that generation where you're going to be American, so you don't speak the language. So she never really connected with her Portuguese culture. But anyway, she was very curious about this conversation because they kept looking at her. And after the gentleman left, the owner of the beauty parlor approached my mother and said, would you like to meet this gentleman? Because my mom was a single woman and in her early 20s or mid 20s. And she was like, this gentleman, he has a friend and he's looking, for someone who possibly could be interested in marriage. And so my mom, she wanted to meet him. So they met, and my mom thought he was very handsome. And she was already enamored of the Italian culture from being best friends with this woman who was the owner of the shop. And so 2 weeks later, after they met, 2 weeks later, they went to Reno and got married. Now, the important thing about this is my mother did not speak Italian and my father did not speak English, but somehow they were able to communicate, got married, and stayed together for 33 years until his passing. So it's very interesting. And my mom assimilated to the Italian culture. And so to this day, my mother can speak Italian and understands Italian quite well. And it's all just because of our upbringing. In the household, everything was the Italian way. The table was set with the tablecloth and the napkins, and they were, the matching set that, everyone in Italy has. It's, we always had Italian bread on the table, fresh Italian bread. My father would bring home from the Italian bakery in San Francisco daily, because my father ended up working in an Italian restaurant in San Francisco. And all of the other chefs there were Italian. So he really never learned to speak English very, very well. He had a very thick accent, and a lot of my friends did not understand what he was saying a lot of the time. But we grew up very Italian, very engulfed in the culture. Like I said, the bread on the table, it was pasta every night, some type of pasta plus some type of meat, whether it be your chicken cutlet, veal cutlet, that was our way of life. We always ate at the same time every day. And everyone, all of our friends were always welcomed at the table. And that the table and eating together was a very, very big deal. That's what you did. It wasn't just Sunday dinner for us. It was every night. And my friends loved to come over. And my friends, being that we were the only Italians in the neighborhood, or that, really I never met anyone else in Oakland the whole time I was growing up that was of Italian descent. So everyone would love to come over, and it didn't, it never mattered, what ethnic background they were. Everyone loved eating at our table and enjoying those different foods that they didn't get anywhere else. So that was my experience growing up. It was very important for my father that we, the children, learned Italian. So he basically spoke Italian at home, but being a child and growing up in an area where there's no other Italian kids or you don't hear it anywhere else but in your home, we were a little embarrassed to speak back in Italian. So, especially if our friends were there. So he would speak to us in Italian, we would answer in English, and he understood us and we understood him. But our parents did make it a priority that we went to Italian school on Saturdays in San Francisco. So when everybody else, all the other kids got to stay home and watch Saturday morning cartoons, that was not our experience. We had to go to Saturday school in San Francisco where we learned proper Italian. Every time I would visit my grandmother in Sicily and all my aunts and uncles and cousins, that was not proper Italian. That was Sicilian, which I still understand today, and I still speak a little bit of it. But in the home with my father, he thought it was very important that we learn proper Italian. So we did go to Italian school for many years in San Francisco. And I have made sure that my daughter, that I'm passing it on to the next generation. She's attended Italian classes ever since she was probably 8 years old. The first time I took her to Sicily, she wasn't even 2 yet. And she's been going just like myself to visit all of our relatives every so often. So I've been like 17 times throughout my lifetime, and she's already been 11 times. So it's very important that we keep that connection. Now, the strange thing about this, or not even strange, but just interesting, is that 10 years after my father passed, which he passed early, he was 58. He passed of cancer. 10 years after that, my family went, and myself, my brother, my mother, our kids, we all went because there was a family wedding out there and with our cousins, and we went to go, celebrate. And in talking with one night, we were having dinner at my uncle's house, and my uncle speaks straight Sicilian. He doesn't speak any English, and he speaks really, really fast, which they tend to do. So in the conversation, he's telling us stories about my dad when he was younger. And there was something he said that triggered in me a question. And after that conversation, I said to my brother, I think he said Pa was adopted. And he was like, I know, I heard that too. And we had never in our wildest dreams thought that was possible. So, and my mother was a little bit upset, and we didn't know why. She wouldn't say. And so we started questioning my aunt the following day, and come to find out my father was adopted. During World War II, he was born, we think, 1943. That's what's on his paperwork. During World War II, and Gela was where Operation Husky started, where the Allied troops came in and, attacked, I guess you would call it, his city. Because of the beach and everything there, it was a good place to land. And so there was a lot of people that got bombed, a lot of houses that got bombed, a lot of people that perished. And we think his family was part of that. But there's also another part where I didn't know this, and through doing research, I found out over time that there was a lot of children abandoned or babies abandoned in what's called a foundling wheel. And it's where they constructed like a wheel where you would deposit your baby in this wheel and turn it, and it would go into usually a convent or something like that, where they would take the babies and take care of them. So World War II, my grandmother was, she had just had a baby during that same time, and her baby unfortunately passed away. And at that time in Sicily, I'm sure it was all of Italy, if you had 3 children, your husband did not have to go to war. And that was her 3rd child. And so when the baby passed away, she decided she was going to adopt another child that needed a home. And so her and her father-in-law, because I guess they had already sent the husband off to war, her father-in-law went with horse and carriage or a cart to where they had the babies, which was somewhere by, it's called Vittoria, which for us might be a 45-minute drive. I'm not sure how long it takes in a horse and cart on roads that aren't paved. So she went and she picked out my father and said, I want that baby. And so these are stories that we're finding out, 10 years after his passing. No idea. We always knew my father did not look like the rest of his siblings, which were large, dark, and my father was small, very thin and fair, light hair. But it never dawned on us that we weren't actually blood related. But then now looking back, it does make sense because I will show you in the pictures, my father next to his brother. So she picked this child out, and my father was an infant, still, I think he might have been maybe a month or 2, maybe even 3 months old at the time. And her father-in-law was trying to discourage her from getting my father because he thought he would die as well, because he was malnourished, and he just thought it wasn't a good choice, and she wanted him. She made a fuss that was the little boy that she wanted, and she actually was still lactating and nursed my father to health. So she brought him back to Gela, and we never knew how prevalent it was for adoption and people to take other children in that were not their own. And I found out later on how prevalent it was. And then when I thought about it, my uncle has adopted a child. My cousin has adopted 2 children. And so it all made sense after the fact. One of the stories that my aunt told me was there was another kid that was adopted 1 street over. And there was a big, what do you call it? There was a big scene that was going on that street with people yelling and screaming, and apparently the child's parents, actual parents, came back and wanted the child, and that child had to be given up. And my father came running home and said, I don't care if they find my mom, I'm not going. And so that that really it really touched our hearts. But like I said, we didn't even know any of this until 10 years after he passed. And we questioned my mother. She knew all along. He told her, but when he was passing, right before he passed away, he made her promise not to tell us, because he did not want us to lose our connection to Sicily and our family. And which was, he didn't have to worry about that. It was already ingrained in us. It was already, solidified. This is our family. And we've always been, they've never treated us any different. We've been part of the family, since day one. And actually my grandmother died 6 months after my father. And a lot of the family was saying, it was a broken heart. She couldn't handle that was too devastating for her because he was her favorite. And so, you're not supposed to have favorites, but, he was. And it's just been finding that out. We would love to know or meet someone who is actually our blood, not for the sense of replacing the family that we have, because that could never be done, but just to see someone who has his characteristics, may look similar to him, and just to know where we're actually from, which we believe, and I've found out through taking a DNA test, is somewhere in the Vizzini Catania area, because we have found through the DNA matches that we do have relatives that are in New York, that their side of the family came in the early 1900s, I believe. And obviously his parents did not leave. So we've traced it back a little bit and know that it's somewhere in that area, but would love to find out one day. And I know it can be done through genetic genealogy. They can trace it. And, one day we're going to find out who our actual relatives are and what our actual family name is. That would be very interesting to find out.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with philitaly.co. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co. I'm sure. Wow, that's some story.
Right.
Well, and it's interesting because I've interviewed a couple of guys that they were adopted. They were born in Italy, adopted in America in the 1960s because Italy wasn't. I don't know if it was illegal or not, but Italians weren't adopting Italian children. A lot of them are being adopted by Americans. But it never dawned on me during World War II that how many children were probably displaced or lost their parents and things like that. And so I have to ask you, was it like a legal adoption, or
yes.
was it? So it was. Oh, yeah.
So I actually got my Italian citizenship, and in getting it, because I was born before my father became an American citizen. So in getting it, you have to produce the birth certificate and everything for my father. And it never dawned on me, the paper that came back from the comune in Sicily with his date of birth, which they listed as January 1st, because they really didn't know his exact date of birth. And it only had my grandmother's name on it because she was the one who did the adopting, because her husband was off to war. And when she was able to come back after that, after she did the adoption. But you couldn't tell from what was sent to me that there was anything fishy about it, that it wasn't an actual birth record, because I have never seen a birth record at that time from Italy. And it didn't have all the information that you would expect. Now I know that. But I was able to get my citizenship and still did not know that my father was adopted. I didn't find out until, 5 years later or something like that. So yeah, it was, I can't even, it was very shocking. It was very shocking. But I don't know, that it seems a lot more common once I thought about it, because like I said, my uncle adopted a child, and my cousins adopted 2 children, and it was a lot. It made sense once I thought about it, but at the time, it was very shocking, because, we have our last name, and, who knows what it really, really is. I'd love to find out, but
well, yeah, and the Italians, they don't do DNA, so
right.
That makes it. Because I was going to ask you.
Harder.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you found somebody in the States, and obviously you did, but
it's distant though. It's distant. The
Yeah.
ones, because that part of the family left in the early 1900s, it might be, our common ancestor could be a great great grandparent. It's not further back than that, but either great or great great grandparent, that is where it probably split off. But yeah, they're very distant. And they don't, it seems like, because I was looking at their tree, their family tree, because you can do that with the DNA sites. And it doesn't seem like they know much about their history. So I couldn't find out through them. It would have to be, I'd have to pay for a genetic genealogist. I've looked into it a little bit, and at some point I do plan on doing it, just because I am very curious now. But it could never replace the family that I have there. Like I said, I never felt anything but love and part of the family.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I mean, my kids are adopted, so I kind of understand that. You have a couple of things that you mentioned earlier, which is funny. When you mentioned the goats and the milking the
Oh,
goats,
yes.
my great grandfather in Torito, he had a cow, and he used to walk through the streets and milk the cow. uh,
Right.
and my aunt, uh, I my family comes from Corona, Queens, which was at the time just probably all Italian. Not that there's hard, I don't think any left now, but she owned a beauty parlor, and it was funny when you mentioned beauty parlor because that's what they were called. And geez, I think all the girls that worked there were Italian. My mom worked there for a while, but I was probably I was probably the first unisex client or customer, because my mother worked there, and so on Fridays when my father would pick her up, I would get my hair cut by my cousin and sit under the big dryer.
Right. Of course. Yes, I
And
know it well. I know it well. I used to go to the beauty parlor when I was probably about 10, 11 years old, and I'd work. I'd sweep up all the hair, I'd wash all the brushes and combs. So yeah, I would get a little, make a couple dollars doing that, and was, happy to do it. So yeah, beauty parlors still are very important in the Italian culture in Italy. In Sicily, people they go to get their hair done, and the hair is always immaculate. You don't go outside with wet hair, which I would get yelled at all the time when I was there in the summer. And I was like, I'm not blow drying my hair in this heat. As soon as I walk outside, I'm going to be sweating because it's so humid there. But everybody immaculate, always, hair done, dressed nice, it's part of the culture.
I
Uh,
know we said that when we were there, especially the last time we walk around the streets. Um, you don't notice it and as much probably in like Naples because there's so many tourists there, but we were in Toronto, uh, and just walking around, and people, they don't dress like us. They dress like we used to dress, but uh,
mhm.
it's you know it's sad in some ways that we kind of lost that kind of thing. And I'm so jealous that you would send to Italian school. I was
Oh,
talking with
yes.
that with somebody. We didn't have that here. I probably would have hated it when I was a kid to go. But I
Right.
wish I'm going to Italian classes now at the Italian club. We started last week. So
Oh, that's
uh,
great.
eventually I'll catch on. I hope. I'm getting
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
my brain isn't a sponge anymore. Everything just leaves. But
It may take a little longer, but you'll still catch on.
uh,
A lot of my friends growing up had no idea that I was even bilingual. Didn't find out until my adult years, because then I embraced it a lot more. Before, I kind of tried to hide it. Um, my father would, back in the day when you'd be playing outside, when it's time to come in for dinner, my father would be on the porch and he'd call me, in Italian for me to go in and come eat. And my friends would they'd make fun of me. And, So I did hide the fact I was bilingual for a long time. But once I became an adult, and especially after my father's passing, it ignited a drive in me to be more connected. Because the majority of the times, the trips that I had going to Italy were my childhood because my parents paid for that ticket. So once I became an adult and had to pay for myself, there was a 10-year gap where I didn't go. So I lost a lot of the language, especially the Sicilian, because that was only spoken when I was there. But then, in recent years, I have made a push, well, the last 10 years, a push to reconnect with, my roots. And I've been several times since my father's passing now to stay with family and record things because it's going to be lost pretty soon. And so I'm trying to, accumulate a lot of what's going on there in our family so that my daughter can then pass it on to her children whenever she decides to have a family. And especially my brother Manuele, it's been the same thing with him as far as it ignited once my father passed and we didn't have that connection anymore. We were starting to get lost. And he has been instrumental in San Francisco in growing the organization that he's now the president of. And I think he's only the second Sicilian president in the entire history of that club, which is over 100 years old. So he's really made a push himself to get connected with our roots because we started to realize that it was getting lost. And I know that happens a lot when you're, for our children, for second generation and third generation Italian Americans, you lose the language, you lose the culture. And we don't want that to happen because that is instrumental in what shaped us to be the persons that we are today. So we've really made a push ourselves in continuing that on to the next generation. And so when my brother started in that club, just becoming a member, who my father was also a member of that club, would go play cards there. And my brother would go with him sometimes when he was playing cards and earn money doing little odd, like going to get them something to drink, or, he would earn money doing little things for the guys there. And so he eventually became a member, but that was after my father's passing, because when we were teenagers and young adults, we weren't interested. We weren't interested anymore. But then we realized as we got older how important it was, and we came back. And so when he started with that club and became a member, the average age of the people that were members also was in the 60s. Like 65 or something like that. So it was older. And if you don't start getting the younger generation involved, it dies out. So in the course of him being a member there, they have really recruited. And now the average age is around 40, 45. So they've really made a push to get the next generation to be a part of this and to continue the Italian culture. So they've been successful. And, it really makes me happy, although I cannot be a member because it is a fraternal organization for men.
That's like mine, ours too.
Yeah. I'm a little salty about it, but it's okay. It's okay. Because I still participate in everything that they have going on. They have one of the oldest foot races in the country, the Statuto race, which there's pictures of, and you can find pictures of some of the first races that happened, but it's in its 105th year or something like that. And it happens every year on the first Sunday in June in San Francisco. And I participate in that every year. I'm going up there for Columbus Day. They have a parade, and all the restaurants set out tables along the parade path. And it's really a fun activity to do with your family. And also, it just coincides with Fleet Week in San Francisco. So the Blue Angels fly across after the parade. So right over the head of where this is located in the middle of North Beach, which is the Italian center of San Francisco. So it's right in front of it goes right in front of the club. The Blue Angels go right over. And, so I participate in a lot of the activities that they have going on, even though I can't be a member myself.
We'll be right back.
A lot can happen in 7 minutes. Luckily, that's how long it takes me to tell a story. I'm Aaron Califato, and if you love short stories, I'd like to invite you to take a unique journey with me on my podcast, 7 Minute Stories. Each episode, I'm going to take you on some crazy roller coaster rides, and together, we're going to try to make sense of the world, all in approximately 7 minutes.
Yeah. I didn't know. I wish I had joined years ago. But I was busy, and my brother joined the club in Florida, and that's why I got involved. But when I got there, I didn't realize when I, first was going there that it was same thing. And somebody had asked, and he said, "Oh, we started to try and have women, members like a while ago, but they couldn't take it." So they didn't want
Yeah,
to be
no,
members.
it's the truth. Someone proposed during one of their meetings for them to open it up to women, but that was when the club's membership was kind of dwindling. And, one of the old Italians stood up and was very upset. And he said, "I come here to get away from my wife." I mean, obviously it's a joke, but things like that. It's funny. It's funny.
And
it
and they
doesn't-
do, and of course they do similar things where they do it, but it's the same thing with our club. I think the average age is 72, but they are starting to get younger members. We have I think about 420 members, so it's not a bad size.
No, that's not a bad size. Theirs is close to 1,000.
Yeah, that's
So,
fantastic. That's great, and
yeah, it's
especially that
grown.
they're getting the young people in.
Oh,
But
yeah,
I think
it's grown.
there's starting to be a resurgence.
I think so, because my brother and myself can't be the only ones that are feeling this way, that, want to get back to our roots, get back to our culture, get back, other immigrants come to the US and they retain it. They retain it a little bit longer than we do. And so hopefully, there is a resurgence and people can be proud of their Italian heritage and start to want to go back and learn. And, if you've never been, it is a culture shock depending on where you go. If you go to a non-tourist area, it's going to be a different way of life for sure. One thing I did find out, my grandfather was a goat herder, because I never knew what my grandfather did for a living, because he was deceased before I was born. So I never knew, never met him. I only had my nonna, who I'm named after, and everybody calls her as a nickname. I guess when you get older, if your name is Francesca, then you become Cicina. And so that's my nonna Cicina. And my daughter was able to meet her and spend time with her at least 4 or 5 times before she passed away. So that was a great experience for her. She still remembers. But finding out my grandfather was a goat herder was very interesting, because that's something that you would think somebody would do in the 1800s or something, be a goat herder. But this was, in the 1940s, 50s. Even I think he died sometime in the 60s. So even up till then. And a lot of families will have what's called, they call it campagna, which is your country home, or your country where you have things planted. And I always grew up going to my grandmother's campagna, which had grapevines and olive trees and fig trees and, all of that. And my grandmother used to make her own wine. So she had the large casks of wine, the super large casks, in her house. And when I was 6 years old, the first time I went, besides the goats coming down the street, my grandmother sold wine. So people would come to the door with their empty glass bottle and would pay and, would get it filled from the large cask of her wine. And because she had both of her arms broke and was from falling down the stairs and was in a cast in both arms, she could no longer do that. So I had the biggest kick out of the people would come to the door, and I had the responsibility of filling the glass bottles with the wine and putting the money in her pocket. And so that was a wonderful memory. And my uncle in Sicily still makes wine today. And my daughter, she just gets a kick out of going over there and filling up her. Well, we do it in plastic bottles now because we transport it home. I still have some wine in my fridge. But now my brother has also started the tradition, and he has grapevines, and this is his first year where he's making wine. And next year, we're going to start a family tradition where all the family in the U.S. Gets together and helps him harvest the grapes, because he did it by himself this year, and it was a lot of work. But we've decided we're going to make that an annual thing where we're going to help him to harvest all of the grapes and get the wine started. So, I know that my family, I send them pictures and videos all the time. WhatsApp was a great invention because that's how we communicate. And they eat it up every time they see us doing things, making things. Like for Christmas, we made arancini. And, we always have lasagna at Christmas. That's like a Christmas dish. But last year, we also had the arancini. And my family in Sicily loves seeing the videos of us doing those things, because it makes them proud that we're continuing to do the things that they relate to. And we're not forgetting them, and we're not losing contact with them. Before, when we were children, on Sundays, my father would call Sicily, and we'd have to get on the phone and speak to my grandmother, and none of us wanted to do it. We tried to pretend like we were asleep. We didn't want to talk on the phone, to Italy, because what are we going to say? Hi, how are you? I love you, and that was it. Now, I call almost daily and talk to one of my cousins, just to keep the connection alive. And I'm constantly sending pictures and videos to them. And it's, the family is strong.
Yeah. And, I wish I had known years ago, especially the first trip we made to Italy 25 years ago. I didn't know that I had so many cousins from my father's family there, because my grandmother and her aunt were the only two who came. Everybody else stayed there. It's
right.
The only ones that, and I mean, now in the last, I don't know, 10 years or something like that, I have two cousins that they now live in San Diego. But when we went there the first time, I mean, had I known, I would have met these people. Nobody ever said anything. And it was only just a couple of years ago that I found out that, my dad's first cousins are still alive. They're in their 90s. Yeah. So, and I think that's a message for everybody. Find them. They want to know who we are. I think more than we want to know who they are,
Right. No, they do. And they will welcome you with open arms 90% of the time. I can't even, when especially if you're from a small town or a town where, there's not a lot of tourists, they think it's wonderful. Mm-hmm. Here come the Americans, you're like a kind of like a celebrity in the town. And, I think a lot of people would be surprised how welcoming they would be once they're found, how much they want to see and know. Family is very important there. I think we've lost that in America. Family isn't as close anymore like they used to be. On my mom's side of the family, I remember when we were kids growing up, because all we had was my mom's side when we were growing up here, because all my father's side was there. I remember doing family picnics and playing, softball and volleyball and, all these things. And it doesn't seem like that. And it wasn't a family reunion. These are just things we did on, during the summer on like a monthly basis or something. It doesn't seem like those things happen anymore with your cousin. You're not as close to your cousins as you used to be. And
Well,
you are.
I think a lot of that's because, people, have drifted apart
Yes.
geographically more than anything else. I
Yes,
mean,
definitely.
when I was growing
definitely.
the three of my cousins lived in the same town. I mean, or two of my uncles lived in the same town as us, and my cousin's cousin lived next door. So we used to, I used to see my cousin Denise, or she's my cousin's cousin, but to hang out with her every single day,
Right.
and even my other cousins, they lived a bus ride away or something like that. And to your point, every Sunday, if you went to my grandmother's house, somebody was there. Maybe not everybody all the time, but there was always somebody there.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I think, but like I said, I think the good thing is there's being a resurgence. I mean, some of the kids in their 20s and 30s, they're naming their kids with the Italian names now.
Right.
You know,
Right. Yeah, there's pride in that. And, I feel sorry for a lot of the immigrants that came that either changed their names willingly or by accident through Ellis Island and things like that. Their names got changed and their names got Americanized. And because of the discrimination that they faced, they didn't teach their kids Italian. They wanted them to be American, so they wanted them to speak English. I feel sorry for them because, it pushes you further away from that connection to your roots. And I do appreciate the fact that I didn't go through that there was always a push on my father's side to connect, to, make sure that it was passed on. And so, like I said, we grew up in an area, we weren't lucky enough, not in our city where we actually lived, to be exposed to other Italians or things like that. But going to San Francisco a lot, that's where they had the Italian bakery where we got fresh Italian bread every day, or the Italian deli where we got our salami and, our mortadella and all of those things that, and that's what we grew up on. It was funny because I went to a celebration of the Catholic school that I went to in Oakland, where we were the only Italian family in the entire school. And one of my friends that I went to school with first through eighth grade, pretty much, one of her memories was of me bringing salami sandwiches to lunch every day on Italian bread, so no one else had that. And back then, Nutella was not, worldwide. So they would look at me weird, I'm eating a chocolate sandwich. They have no idea what I'm doing, but that's what I grew up on.
well, we went to the beach. We went to the beach and had eggplant parmesan sandwiches and sausage and pepper sandwiches.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. My family would go to the beach when we were in Sicily, and kid you not, they would bring pasta al forno, lasagna, a whole watermelon, and they'd bury the watermelon deep in the sand because it would stay cool that way. Because ice is not the biggest deal out there, especially back then. People don't use ice. So they didn't have the coolers with the ice and all that. And the lasagna would stay warm because it's hot. They would cook it right before you get there. And we would be on the beach all day long because Gela it's a beach town, but not a lot of tourists. So we would have these full-on meals at the beach with, these, pasta dishes and all kinds of fruit and nuts. And, I spent my childhood doing that. At the age of 12, I started going by myself without my family. They would send me, and I would go and spend summers with my grandmother. And sometimes I would ask to go. And they would, I would go and spend the summer there. And it was basically the life consisted of pretty much in the summertime, the beach every day, every day.
So you used to make that trip from California all the way there
California,
by yourself. Wow.
yes.
People wouldn't
And
do that anymore. They'd be terrified to do that.
oh, they'd be terrified. Yeah. But, I come from the generation that you walked to school.
Yeah, well, me
I was
too.
on the bus at age 10, catching the bus different places, to a friend's house, down to the beauty parlor where my mother worked. So I was, public transportation was what I was, what I grew up on.
I used to go to New York City at 12 years old on the train by
Right,
myself,
right.
me and my
So,
friend, and then no, you didn't think twice about it.
right. So my first time that I went by myself, I was 12, and I was fine. I went from San Francisco to New York because they didn't have direct flights to Rome back then. So San Francisco to New York, then I changed planes and got on the plane from New York to Rome. But in Rome, I didn't realize that I needed to get out of the international terminal and go to the domestic terminal. So I kept walking around in a circle and couldn't figure it out. And finally, I went to the Alitalia desk and said, okay, I have a flight here. I can't find it. I don't know how to get there. And they escorted me at that point. And then once I landed in Catania, my grandmother and my cousins were there, and they were asking me, are you sure this is your grandmother? Yes, that is my grandmother. I know my grandmother. But after that, I was fine going by myself. I knew what to do. But yeah, at 12 years old was the first time I went by myself. So
well,
it's crazy.
and it's
Times
a,
have changed.
it's a different
Times have
world.
changed.
I guess maybe I lived from my school, because I went to a Catholic school. Maybe I lived, I don't know, a quarter of a mile, a third of a mile, or something like that. I used to walk second grade. I was walking to school by myself.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I have memories of kindergarten. The first few months, someone would walk with me, but after that, it was a group of kids that would walk there together and walk home together. So yeah, I have memories of doing that in kindergarten. In first grade, I was walking to a different school because the kindergarten was a public school, and then first grade, I started at the Catholic school.
And now, if they have air conditioning, and if it's too hot, you can't go to school. You can't go in a car. You can't do this. You can't do that. We used to go in the snow, in the rain, and we, like you, we didn't have air conditioning in the school.
Right. No. I remember it being so hot and humid in Sicily in the summertime that we would just sleep on the marble floor in my grandmother's house because that was the coolest place to be. Sleeping in the bed wasn't as comfortable, but sleeping on the marble floor, yeah, that was the coolest place to be. So
That's
yeah,
so funny.
a lot of memories.
That's like our dog. When it's real hot, he sleeps on the floor. He doesn't go into bed because it's cooler. But obviously, it's cooler on the wood floor.
Oh yes.
But yeah, like I said, I think if I had known what I know now, 20 or 25 years ago, I wouldn't say we'd be living there, but I definitely would have had a house there. I would have had a place there somewhere. Because it is the thing that I find is it's a slower lifestyle, a happy lifestyle.
Yes.
And like you said, when I met my dad's cousins, as soon as I walked through that door, they treated me like they knew me ever since I was born.
Oh, yes.
You can't explain it. You can't explain it.
Yeah. The first time I went when I was 6, when my uncle picked us up from the airport. And when we got to my grandmother's house, it was total confusion. There were so many, that place was so packed with so many people that it scared me. I started crying. And then after a while, I got used to it because all these people just rushing at you, wanting to pick me up, wanting to kiss me. And I have no idea who they are or what they're talking about because they were all speaking in Sicilian. And my father had raised me on Italian, and it's a very different language. It's not a dialect, it's an actual language. There's a lot of words that have a Arabic background. And so, the sound of it is totally different from Italian. And, so the confusion of that scared me. I have memories of, there was only one telephone at that time on the whole block, on both sides of the street, on my grandmother's street. She didn't have it. It was a second cousin down at the end of the block. And if you wanted to call America or someone wanted to call you, you would have to ask to use her phone, or they had a bunch of telephones on the piazza where you could go to a place and pay to use the telephone to call the US. And that's what we used to do. It was very different back then. Another memory I have is realizing how different we were from where I was raised, because my father, he actually didn't drive. He wasn't a good driver. And you can tell how the way, if you've ever been to Rome or any city really in Italy, they drive crazy. I did actually learn how to drive as a teenager in Sicily. So that helped me out. I can drive there now, but they drive crazy. So when my father came to the US, my family decided it wasn't a good idea for him to drive. So he actually would catch public transportation to work every day in San Francisco. But I remember him coming home because he would walk home at the same time every day from the bus stop. And, the way he dressed, he still dressed like he was in Italy. And I remember playing on the street, and some of the older kids who were teenagers at the time were talking about, oh, your father's in the mafia, your father's in the mafia. And I had no idea what the mafia was. I had not seen The Godfather. I didn't know. And I remember running in the house crying because I knew they made it sound derogatory. So I ran in the house crying, saying, they're saying Pa is in the mafia. And my mother was just like, no, he's not. And that's when I learned what it was, sort of a child's view of it, if you will. And I think a lot of people have that stereotype, especially Sicily. In the 80s in Gela, where my family is from, there was a lot of mafia things going on, not within my family, but a lot of things happening. And I think it got a bad rap, especially the city where I'm from. And if you read a lot of travel books that were written in the 80s, like, there's a guy on PBS, I can't think of his name right now, but he's always going to Europe and visiting different places. Anyway, he put out a travel book about Sicily, and he said to avoid Gela, which is where my family's from. And I'm like, why? We have a nice beach, beautiful beach. We have, archaeology, so many ancient artifacts from the Greek occupation have been found in that city, but no one knows. We have a beautiful museum of all these artifacts, but nobody knows because of that stigma of the mafia. And it's so not like that. Like, you can go there now today, even when I was a child. I have a best friend that I grew up with across the street. Her family grew up across the street from my grandmother. And every time I go, we would, hang out together and have fun and go to the beach and, go to the piazza and go to the discotheque and, all these things. And there's so many things that were great. Like, we would be out at night as 12-year-olds, 13, 14, 15, and be able to just, go wherever we wanted and not have to worry about kidnapping and things like that, whereas in the US, you would never let your kids out, late at night without worrying about something happening something's going to happen. it's a different lifestyle. And I was there in May and was having dinner with my best friend and her husband. And we were talking about it and talking about the differences between there, because her kids were out and it was like a Friday night, and she has a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. And they were out with their friends at the hangout spot by the beach and at another friend's house. And, it was late at night, midnight. And, they weren't concerned or worried at all. And I said, you can't do that in America. America sounds great to them. It sounds wonderful. It's the best thing since sliced bread, which they still don't have. But, there's a lot of, things you have to be careful for here, which they have no idea. When I told them that, kids can't go out like that because there is a definite risk of kidnapping and human trafficking. And my friend thought the kidnapping was for ransom. And she was like, kidnapping? And they were like, oh, to pay ransom? I was like, no. Kidnapping, and you'll never see them again because they've been killed or they've been trafficked. It was totally foreign to them, totally foreign.
And her daughter's 27. She's a nurse in Tampa, and she works nights sometimes. And we worry about her.
Oh yes,
being in the car alone, going
too.
Yeah, going
and
from.
I still, yes,
yeah.
I worry. It's a totally different lifestyle there.
And
you said, it's a slower life. You enjoy your time more. I actually am going to be retiring there within the next 7 years.
Right.
My husband and I, and he's not Italian. He's been twice with me, and he doesn't speak Italian, but he loves it. And we're going to be moving because, once we are retired and living on, retirement, we can afford the life there. Whereas here, it's going to be a little more difficult.
Yeah.
But people have to get used to, a lot of people think about doing it, but you should make some trips first and really see what it's like.
Well,
because like you were saying about the air conditioning, people in my town, none of my family has air conditioning. But if you go to like a B&B, a bed and breakfast, or a hotel, of course they have it. But and some families do have it now. But that's one major thing that I think a lot of my friends from the U.S. would have a problem with the heat and not having access to air conditioning.
Yeah, I'm sure. And we were in Bari last year, and even there, it's along the waterfront and everything. There were people of all ages, very respectful. You didn't feel threatened. You didn't, there were a couple of policemen hanging around, but you didn't really feel that you had to worry.
Right.
At least we didn't.
No, you don't though. You don't. Maybe in a more tourist area, a large city, a very large city.
Well,
I'm sure it's going to be the same.
Well,
like
Naples, you have to be careful. Palermo,
right.
you have to be careful. But coming from New York, we're always looking around anyway. So you probably feel the same way, right?
Oh yes.
We're always looking.
Yes.
So
yes.
Sorry, don't worry that much. That we don't worry that much. Well, Francesca, I could go on for another 3 hours. Appreciate you being on and taking the time, especially getting up early and doing all of that. Thanks again.
Sure. I love to talk about my experiences.
No, me too.